Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when and where you're watching this. This is a conversation, episode 6, with Beth D'Amato. I'm Frank Dotzer, videographer and director of photography. I have known Beth D'Amato for more years than I care to tell anyone. And Beth is here today to have a conversation about her success and her dream come true. Beth is a Visual Effects Society award-winning digital paint supervisor with over 20 years of experience in visual effects, and she's also a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, which is a great accomplishment right there. She recently supervised the digital artist across 2 studios on Marvel's Black Widow, which is a bit delayed now, I think, because of the COVID. But she also oversaw artists on Ron Howard's Solo, a Star Wars story, and she was a key contributor to multiple effects-driven films, including Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, and Captain Marvel. I'm excited today to have Beth here. Good morning or afternoon, Beth. How are you doing?
Good morning, Frank. I'm doing great. That was
So
a nice intro. Thank you.
I read it right from your bio. That bio that you sent me was amazing. I was like, I can't read this bio. That'll take a half hour right in itself. So,
Yeah.
but really exciting to have you here and just to connect with you in general. You and I haven't seen or talked to each other in a long, long time. And I miss you. So it's good
I
that I
miss
get
you
a chance
too.
to see you.
It's good
So,
to see you.
this is a conversation, and I know we're going to kind of like jump around a little bit, but I think a big part of what makes you an exciting person to talk to is you are really one of these people that had a dream come true story. You started out in visual effects and graphics. You and I actually worked together, or were you worked when you worked back at GE years ago. But can you tell me kind of the story, a Reader's Digest version of how you got where you are, and where you started and how you got interested.
Yeah, I mean, to really get into my interest in it, you'd have to go way back. It's a cliche with people that I work with, but it's the God's honest truth. When I saw Star Wars, it was the week it opened, 1977 in Milwaukee, and I flipped out. Made my parents take me to see it a million times. I memorized it, here this little 7-year-old girl, and I knew every line of that movie. And it actually influenced me my entire life. Like for a while, it was just fun to play, but then I imagined myself getting to do what the filmmakers did. I had like a making of book that was written for kids, but I saw all the pictures of George Lucas and people on set. And I remember telling my parents, I'm like, I want to do that someday.
That's
And I just
amazing.
never forgot it. Of course, I went down different paths at different times where I thought I'd want to do some other things. But once I got to college, sure enough, I started with a different major, but halfway through my freshman year, I switched back to broadcasting, or not back to, but I switched to broadcasting, and it just took off from there. I realized that a kid from Milwaukee could actually do this if they applied themselves in the right way and paid attention to the right courses and the right jobs. And that's what I did. I was a broadcasting major at Marquette, and I chose Marquette over some other schools. They had great on site facilities. They had TV studios. They had camera equipment that you could rent out or check out and use even as a freshman. And I got involved in their television station, and I ended up doing a lot of TV studio work in my free time. And then I did internships. I interned at Midland Video Productions. We can't talk about how I got where I am without talking about Neil Janert and George Liberatore giving me a chance. I was a production assistant there, and that's where I learned graphic arts as well. I already had an interest in graphic arts, but at the time there were no programs for computer graphics in college courses. There are now, but we're talking back in the early 90s and or late 80s, and there weren't any. So I learned on the job training. I learned the graphics paint box system at Midland Video, went back and applied it in some of the TV productions at Marquette. And then on every internship I had, I looked for an opportunity to do that kind of work. And at GE, I was GE Medical Systems where we met. I was hired there as a production assistant, but I also offered my services as another graphic artist and eventually became a junior graphic artist and then one of their full-time graphic artists. And that's kind of where it all took off as far as career. And then
Beth, it's
eventually, oh, go ahead.
it's interesting. I just to interject. You know, a big part of this had to be timing too, right? Because from the standpoint of in the last few years or during when your career was progressing forward, that's when things were really taking off in the digital effects realm, right? And everything was going digital, and Star Wars came out, and everybody looked at that like, wow. Now you look back on it, and it looks rudimentary, right? The very first Star Wars.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, where, and this is completely off the cuff, where do you think you would have went if the timing was different? Say, if we were back a little bit farther and things weren't going into, do you think you would have become like a graphic artist for advertising, or because it's a unique skill and a unique kind of genre right now that you're doing, right?
It is. And what's interesting, I think I would still have gone down the same path. So when I came to California and applied at ILM, it wasn't I want to work there and work on the next Star Wars, because at the time episodes 1, 2, and 3 weren't even being worked on. They weren't even being discussed. I started right when they had redone the Star Wars special editions and re-released them in theaters, and I wasn't at ILM yet. It was right on the cusp of that finishing. So for me, it was all about Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's special effects company or visual effects company, and I knew that they worked on feature films. I'm like, I want to do that. And even when I was in college, it wasn't just Industrial Light and Magic; it was visual effects and animation. So I was like, I want to work on something with kids. So I kind of thought I was going to go that route, but I ended up I decided that I needed to at least apply at Industrial Light and Magic. And if I didn't get in, then I would pursue film elsewhere, or I would pursue television. But I wanted it to be in the entertainment field. So
So
I
how did
don't think
so
I
how
would have
did
ended up in advertising. It just wasn't
yeah
where my heart was.
yeah I just curious about where you thought you would have went. What kind of sparked you into that? Because some kids would have went to see Star Wars and would have said, "Oh, I want to be an actor." Uh,
Yeah. As a kid for a while, I did say that. Like,
yeah,
I remember being like, 10 and 12, and I was like, okay, well, I want to be an actor. And if they ever make another Star Wars movie, I want to be Luke Skywalker's sister.
yeah,
It was like
right.
very specific. I got older and I thought, well, that's probably not that realistic, but
Yeah.
it's pretty realistic that I could try to work on a movie. And at the time, I wasn't even thinking I had to work on a Star Wars movie because, like I said, they weren't even being conceived of yet. When they announced that episode 1 was going to be worked on, I was already an employee, and I was like, oh my God, this is my chance, and then I got to work on episodes 1, 2, and 3, and then eventually 7, 8, and 9.
So
So
when you got to the point of applying at ILM, how was that? How did that go? Was that like a long, tedious thing? Was it? Did you have to go through multiple interviews? How
it's
did it
kind
work?
of a good story, and I don't have to make it too long, but I
Okay.
interviewed twice. So once I was out here for SIGGRAPH, the Computer Graphics Convention. I came out to LA, and I I met I met some folks from ILM there and got a name or something like that. And I went back home to Milwaukee and I sent a tape and I sent a resume and I got a letter that just said, "Hey, you sound kind of interesting, but you're not local." Well, I worked longer at my job in Milwaukee and got better at what I did. And then when I eventually moved out to California, I specifically didn't want to go to LA because Industrial Light and Magic is in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. And I was like, well, I'm going to move there because they told me I wasn't local. So when I move, I'm going to go there and at least try one more time to get an interview. So I got an interview. I moved out here. I got an interview and I thought I completely blew it. I was interviewing, I didn't even realize the job specifics. It said computer graphics technical assistant. It was entry level. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But the TAs are very, very technical. The technical assistants are really helping with the renders. They're not programming, but it's all on the almost like the hardware side of things, the pipeline side of things, nothing creative. And I was applying for more of a creative position in my mind. And what was amazing was the person who I interviewed with was like, you're probably better suited for a creative position. We're going to keep your resume on file. We'll call you. And I knew that. I'm like, that's the line you tell somebody to get them out of the room.
Right.
So I went home and I cried my eyes out because I
Oh
thought I
no.
blew it. And about 6 months, maybe 7 months later, I got a call from HR and they said, "Hey, you interviewed really well. There's a creative entry level position open. Would you like to come back and interview again?" And I did. And then I cried my eyes out because I was so nervous and I wanted it so bad. Then I interviewed. I wanted it so bad. I had no idea if I interviewed well or not. Blew my eyes out again, crying. Then I got the call saying that I actually got the job offer and I
Wow.
lost it. So it was just a big emotional
7 months,
roller.
though, Beth. That was a 7 month period before you heard from them.
Yeah, and I thought I was written off. I was like, well, that was my chance. I interviewed at ILM, and it's never going to happen
Did you
again.
do
And
did
I
you
tried.
did you do any, like, follow ups? Just checking in on my resume to see if anybody looked at it, or
Yeah, I
yeah.
did one or two calls, and they were just like, yeah, we have your resume. And again, I didn't only interview there. I had applied at video game companies, all these creative positions where I could get into computer graphics that wasn't business television,
Yeah.
and nothing against it. I knew I wanted to get into entertainment television. I wanted to make that transition.
Yeah.
Because even when I moved out here, my first job was in ILM. I did end up at Total Video Company in South San Francisco. And the first thing they had me do was a medical video. I had to draw cutaways of the heart, which is exactly what I did for 4.5 years in Milwaukee. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is great. I know this, but
Yep.
good God,
Yep.
I want to do something different. So, yeah, I had followed up and there was nothing at the time. So for me, I really do credit a lot of that to the HR person who was given my file.
Mhm.
She read it, she read the notes from my previous interview and was able to pair me with a job that was appropriate. And it turned out I was offered two different positions in the art department, actually.
Mhm.
I was offered art department coordinator or art department production assistant. The coordinator was better paying, but it was also more of an administrative role, and you'd be on a management track. And they even told me, they're like, you kind of have a head for management if that's what you'd like to do. And I said, if I don't give myself the chance to do the artistic job, I will never forgive myself. So it was a pay cut, definitely,
Yeah.
from leaving Milwaukee and coming here. And I took it. I was like, this is my chance to get in.
But I think your philosophy, it sounds a bit like mine, and maybe I'm being a little pretentious in saying this, but I think the idea of, I used to always say, especially when I was getting in the video business, that you know in order to understand what you're doing, you need to start at the bottom and kind of work your way through. So what all those people that later on maybe you're supervising or whatever, what they're going through and what they're struggling with, right? Uh,
Definitely.
I think you took that because you're kind of in a management position now, right? You're managing people that are doing that. I know you're doing work yourself, but you're also managing groups, correct?
Right. I'm an artist myself and I'm an artist supervisor. So yeah, I'm managing teams and their expectations and their priorities, their deliveries. And we collaborate on how to do certain shots. So yeah, it definitely helps. And I will say, in all the years that I've been doing this here and even at other companies, my favorite people to work with are the people who understand the other positions and don't see it as just one track. Just I that's the job I want, and when I need to skip over all these other levels to get there. Like the people who have empathy with roles that are seen as, I don't want to say beneath them, but that are entry level, that there are steps to the ladder. And as long as you can appreciate and understand all those steps and treat everyone with empathy and understanding,
Mhm.
those are the types of people that I have the most fun
Yeah.
working with, and it's the best collaboration.
A great story, and just a hard work, hard working out, or work ethic. I talked to a couple. I don't know, Steve Betcher, who
Yeah.
does. Yeah. So Steve and I had a conversation a while back, and one of the things that Steve said to me one or two times, said, Frank, if you or I or whatever, if we decided to move to LA or whatever, the work ethic, Midwest work ethic, goes a long way. you know he said that was what got him into a lot of his interviews and things like that with people, and I hear that in you, and I think that's a contributing factor, the fact that you were out there, and not only did you to be diligent about contacting the people and that, but your work ethic is what makes you successful, a big part of what makes you successful. Do you think so?
I agree. I definitely agree. And I've heard other people say that too about the Midwestern work ethic. And, I can definitely attribute it to my dad, who was a manager my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, Midland Video and GEMS TV, GE Medical Systems Television, working with Dave Ross and Dave Toy there.
Yep.
And working with, Neil Janert and George Liberatore at Midland Video, obviously they were in the Midwest and they have the same Midwest work ethic. And it was, work hard. Not, first of all, show up, work hard, but show that you're dedicated, and that I can't lose that. I hang on to that, and I think that shows out here as well. There are plenty of people who think, getting a job in this industry is who you know, and there are plenty of stories like mine where no, it's about what you do and how you prove yourself. So to me, that was more important because I actually didn't know anybody at Lucasfilm or Industrial Light and Magic, and it can happen. You just have to apply yourself and show that you have the heart and you have the determination.
Yep, I'm with you. The next thing I want to bring up, because I think this is fascinating also, and I now back in the day when you and I knew each other, you had an affinity for collecting. And I used to say it was a Star Wars collection, but now that I see pictures of it, it's not just Star Wars. It's a science fiction kind of thing, right? I mean,
It's evolved. So you were correct. Back then, it was a Star Wars collection. So I had the first 12 action figures as a kid. They were released all in one day, and my dad was a Kmart manager. So I came home from school one day, and he had all 12 figures in their cards, unopened, just placed throughout the living room. And I came home from school and I was like, what is this R2D2? And I looked around, I'm like, they were everywhere. And I flipped out, played with them. I still have the original 12, but I never had the vehicles. And, I just had the figures and the Star Wars cards. And as I got older and became, independent, had my own place, I was like, I'm going to pursue this collection. And I ended up getting vehicles. I had everything. And I think, I don't remember if you saw it or you just heard, but I had a Star Wars room in my first apartment.
Yep, I knew that.
My guest room was a Star Wars room. The sheets, the bedspread, the Darth Vader speakerphone, everything, the entire room. And I think if ILM knew that, they probably wouldn't have hired me. There's a thing
He's
where
obsessed.
Like, to hire people who are fans.
She's crazy.
Let's go hire the fanatics. So
no,
I kept that on the PL.
I think it's really cool. And now, do you keep it all at home now?
Right. It's evolved now. Now it's more of a science fiction collection. I'm a robot fanatic, and then old sci-fi like Buck Rogers and that TV show V.
Do you keep it all at home, Beth, or is it? Do you have any stuff at work, or is it all at home, or how? Because I just ran the clip of all your stuff. I wish they were with you next to it and whatever. And I'm trying to figure out, is this all at your house or is this some of it at work?
Well, the photos that I showed you are all at my house. I have a glass display cabinet, and they're not all on display. Every now and then I'll take some things out and swap some things in. I do have a few things at work as well. Which is bumming me out because right now with the shelter in place, I'm like, I hope my things are okay. Yeah. And of course they are. Nobody's there.
Right.
But we each have like a little bookshelf at our desk at work, and you can do with it what you will. They're totally fine with everybody personalizing their workspace and having fun with it. And in different places, I've moved to different locations at work within those buildings, and in some places, I shared an office with somebody and I kind of went nuts. I put artwork up on the walls. I had robots there. But
cool.
For the most part, it's all here. Yeah. I just can't put it all out at the same time because I have a partner now who doesn't want our guest room to be a toy room.
Yeah, somehow I can relate to that. I can relate to that. I think with video equipment sometimes. I think I get a. Why are you getting another camera? Where does this stuff have to be in the den in the back? When I'm prepping stuff, and it's so we all fight that fight a little bit. But
yeah, I bet. Is there anything you're collecting?
What's that?
Is there anything you collect other than, I know you have a lot of video equipment, which is.
Yeah, I'm not really a collector. For a while. People would say, "Oh, why don't you collect cameras?" Because I had some old movie cameras. I mean, I started with a little old, a little Brownie camera, and the wind-up movie cameras and all that.
Yeah.
I had those things for a while, but I'm just not. It's just not in me to be a collector, I guess. And it's probably really good because I can see from where I am with video equipment. Because if I became a collector, I think I'd be very obsessive, and I'd need to just get the next, greatest thing or the thing that's the most rare. How do I get my hands on it? And I probably wouldn't have any money for groceries or anything else. So
I can relate to that.
Yeah, it would be exactly that. Hey, I want to talk about your work now. Now it's my turn a little bit to geek out because, I love this stuff anyway. And you sent me a bunch of clips which are really fascinating. And I want to talk a little bit about them. And I know some of them I recognize from certain films, and some of them you may have to tell me. Now, this is a little difficult. I told Beth ahead of time because Beth really can't see these clips as we're doing this, but I'll kind of talk you through it.
Sure.
Let's start with I called it Robo Walk. It was that shot, and I think it was from one of the Star Wars films where we had a live action actor with a gray suit walking through a doorway, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
that's from Rogue One,
okay,
the first anthology movie in between Episode 7 and Episode 8. So what that is, there's an actor, Alan Tudyk, wearing a motion capture suit, and he's on stilts. And I don't know, looking at that clip, I can't remember if there was a structure on his head too, and I don't know if he's wearing that. He might just have a little cap on. But either way, it's a motion capture suit. He was playing the robot K2SO.
right.
And so he's on stilts because the robot is taller than everybody else. And we're capturing the motion so that the animators can take his movement, bring it into the computer, and they're not having to do every single keyframe of motion by hand. They're kind of doing a collaboration of keyframe animation and incorporating his motion so they get his actual performance.
Sure.
But for me and my team, the challenge was we needed to remove him because I don't know if you've got the final comp shot. At some point while we're discussing, you might want to go between them if you can. We didn't
I
talk
am
about
right now. I'm doing that right now. So I've got
his
the
body
robot
shape.
shot up right now.
Great. So the final shape of the robot is not a human form. He has super, super tall, skinny legs. So you could see that actor, once we put the actual robot, the animated character in the scene, you could see Alan in his motion capture suit behind him.
Right.
And that's typically a lot of the kind of paint that I do, is removing somebody in a motion capture suit so that their character can go over them. However, K2 was quite a challenge, which we love. We love that kind of paint work where you're not just doing things that stick out on the edges on the left or right of the object. Like, you can see so much of him. We just had to do complete removal. And we had to reconstruct the actor who was walking with him. So you can see Alan Tudyk in his motion capture suit kind of obscures a soldier walking with him on the right side of frame. And we had to completely, by hand, repaint that person as though the motion capture suit was never there. So that's the kind of paint that I do daily.
And that's the stuff I find fascinating because, like I said, I don't know much about this, but I've done a small amount of rotoscoping and a small amount of this. And, in the 3 seconds or whatever that I've had to repaint frames or things, I go, oh my God, how am I going to do this?
Right.
That's exactly what I was looking at because those are things I look for. So this guy's walking, and instead of, having like someone in a green suit or something, you're actually using his motion to make the motion of the robot, but then you're having to take him out and repaint anything where he was probably overlapping the back of the scene, right? The person in the door.
And even if it was like a blue suit or a green suit, we would, if we weren't recording his motion, my department and my team of people would still have to go in and remove where that green suit or that blue suit was. Because you can hit a button, so to speak. Compositors would throw up if they heard me say it's just hitting a button. But you can do a green screen extraction and a blue screen extraction, as you know.
Right.
But when they're interacting with a character, for example, one clip I wasn't allowed to provide because we're really not supposed to go into the visuals of it all, but there was a blue suit actor crawling all over Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie The Revenant. Yeah. And I had to work on the bear attack. And in that movie, I had to paint out the blue suit actor crawling all over him. So, there's clothes, there's shadows, there's interaction. And we have to recreate all of that. So
Beth, what's your reference for that? I mean, so if he's and yes, and that scene was amazing too. And I have seen a little pieces of that have snuck out on the internet, where this guy is grabbing Leonardo DiCaprio in the suit, and they or you put the bear in. But what's your reference? When somebody's moving around like that and
sure.
And to make it seamless, I know when there's action, there's motion blur in there that helps a little bit, but from the standpoint,
that makes it more forgiving.
Yeah, but from the standpoint of when somebody's doing that, it's not like you have a plate. It's not like you had Leonardo DiCaprio on the ground moving around, and then you put the green screen guy on top of him, so you'd have a reference plate to to paint
Right.
that back in. So are you just doing that artistically, saying, okay, this is where his, this is what his shirt would look like, so I'll draw or recreate his shirt?
Yeah, it's 80% that and 20% one of the first things we'll do when we get a sequence like the one on Rogue One. That actor that I had to reconstruct, he was wearing a uniform that we're familiar with, that we've seen in other shots. So if the motion capture guys are covering something, the first thing I'll do is go back and look through the entire sequence of that particular shot. That sequence was called IF. I don't remember what it stands for, but I'd look through all the IF shots in that entire sequence. So and look at that uniform from all angles. So there's like a red and blue thing that almost looks like a pen holder on one side of him. I'll
Hmm.
look at that in other shots and count how many blue squares, how many red squares, and if I can cut and paste it from within the shot I'm working on to recreate something, I will. I just did a shot yesterday, and I didn't have anything. I didn't have anything to pull from, so I made it up. Part of somebody's arm was completely occluded, and I had to recreate some armor and a piece of shirt with wrinkle, but I took some wrinkles from one part of the shot, put it where it needed to go, and painted the rest into the right shading form. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
could cut and paste something and it's not in the right shape, but then I
That's
can mold it and
that's what's so amazing to me, Beth, and the amount of, and I imagine there has to be a number of passes, right? Because one, you're using it for the content, and number two, maybe you're using for the texture. Number three, you're using for the lighting, and that's the thing that
right.
always amazes me, that when you can take something out like that and you think of, now how many passes did they have to do on this to get that thing to be basically non-existent, so that nobody knows,
Yes.
right?
There are some where now I've been doing it for so many years, I can look at something and I know that, oh, that's going to be a simple paint out. I can do that in one take. But
Hmm.
then the more complex things like we're talking about, like that actor walking behind K2 or the bear attack, those take many, many versions. And what I like to tell people, sometimes I'll show them work in progress, but I'm like, you know what? Don't put this in your composite yet because people might get thrown off. What I tend to do is I paint like blocking. If I have to reconstruct somebody's body in a very complex way, I'll at least block in, okay, here's where the arm is going to go, or here's where the waistline is going to stop. So I can get all the things that need to not bounce. If somebody's wearing jeans and I have to paint a shirt in jeans, like I need that waistline to be in the same place all the time.
Right.
I make it ugly before I make it pretty, because
Yep.
blocking is not about getting the right shading, having the wrinkles moved in the right way,
Mhm.
or having a shadow move across somebody the right way. But blocking is, this is the person's structure, or this is the box in the room that I have to recreate. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's about a scene, or it's about the background and not about the person.
And what
Again,
about and
and
what about
blocking,
what
then I
about
make it
sorry.
artistically correct.
What about the perspective too? I mean, you say sometimes you cut and paste a piece, right? But like roughly, if we go back to the Revenant, where we were talking about, I mean, he's moving left and right and back and up, and you're putting a piece in there that maybe you only had a front view of it, right?
Right.
So
Right.
now, the person's moving back and whatever, and that piece that you're pulling is not a 3D piece. It's still, everything is coming
Right.
off of a single plane, right? So now
Yeah,
you
this
have
is
to.
great because you understand it so well. That's exactly, there are times I'll do that with like a paint stroke. I might copy it, one little, circular piece of something and place it in. And it's like you said, it gives me the right object. Like maybe it's a button on a jacket, or just for this conversation, or a tie, and it's not in the right perspective. What I can do then, I get it at least so I have the object itself. Then sometimes just with lighting changes, I can make something look like it's depressed or raised, or I can go in and give it some transformations, based on how I'm painting. So I'll do that. Sometimes I take a source frame, like maybe I have
Mhm.
frame one of something and I'm going to paint it onto frame five. I can take frame one and twist it and shear it and change its perspective a bit, and then put it into frame number five, and then finesse it with motion blur or lighting. So there is a lot that I did learn at, I took a few courses at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design,
Mhm.
MIAD, right
Yep.
downtown. When I was a student at Marquette, they had some crossover credits. And I have to say, one of the best things I ever did was give myself some fine art training. I was always an artist. I could sketch and do little paintings, but nothing fantastic. And I certainly wouldn't call myself a fine artist even today. And I don't sit with canvas and an oil paints and a palette. But I did learn perspective lines. I did learn lighting, and I did learn what makes something look 3D and what doesn't. And the years I had a year and a half, almost 2 years in the ILM art department, where I worked with all the art directors who do the concept art for movies. A director comes in and says, "Hey, I want to make an explosion, or I need something to happen that, with an actor and a creature, and I need you to show me what the possibilities are." And they'll paint up version after version, and the director will say, "That's the one, put that in the movie." Well, I was working with the art directors as their assistant, and then I became a junior concept artist, and I learned from them too. I could take something and they're like, "Okay, paint, put paint the color of this car and change the color. Now make this car look wet." And I learned some of those techniques from
Well,
them.
and I
I know
saw,
I'm getting very specific, but
yeah, those people
all
are,
that applies. So it's anything you're doing in Photoshop applies
yeah.
to what we're doing.
And
We're just doing it on a moving image.
Those
So
people you
that's
talked
even
about, those people are amazing artists. I mean, I've seen, who is it? Is it Geiger who did the stuff for Alien, right?
Yeah.
And
Major
I saw some
yeah.
of those concept pieces, and oh my god, I mean that, and and what did they do with those? It's like, okay, when you're done with those, if you don't think I go through, just give them to me. I'll put them on my wall, because I think that art is so amazing, and I'm wondering, are they, the director looks at, yeah, not this, not this, not this, and they just
Right.
throw those away, and you're going, and how much
A
time
lot of them they keep on file
do
at the
they?
art department, because sometimes a director comes back. They can take things to a certain level and just go, "You know what? Let's back up. Let's go back to this other version."
Right.
So they like to hang on to those, or there's going to be sequels, and maybe a concept that was overlooked for the first film is going to be used in the second.
Sure.
So they hang on to them. There's a whole archive, and then after a certain number of years, I know that they don't clean them out, but yeah, they don't have all of them. And sometimes the studio keeps that artwork as well.
Right,
Sometimes
right.
we'll make concept art at ILM, but it belongs to the studio, not to ILM. So then they'll archive it themselves.
Okay. All right, so I'm kind of geeking out here, as you can tell. So
Yeah.
I apologize. For getting-
Oh, I love it.
I know.
Like the next.
I know. That's what I'm afraid. But I think Facebook cuts us off after 4 hours, so we probably can't talk that long. So I want to go on to this this other piece you sent me. It was two stills, and I'm going to run this.
Sure.
This was Emily Clark with I think this was from Solo also, and with the robot in the cockpit.
Sure, and
that one?
in that green screen suit, or the green suit of the robot, that's Phoebe Waller-Bridge from the show Fleabag, who's been getting a lot of attention lately. She played L3 was the name of the robot. This is a good example of paint and roto. So in this film, it was interesting. Typically, what we would do there is remove the green suit and reconstruct everything in the scene where the green suit doesn't need to be seen, because basically what we were keeping were those pieces of the robot.
Right.
And you can see the completed robot next to her. But they ended up loving Phoebe's performance so much as L3. She actually spoke the robot's lines on set and added a bit of life to the robot that nobody expected. They knew she'd be good. That's why they casted a real actor. But they loved her so much that they required us to do all of these shots in a way that gave the director, Ron Howard, like a smorgasbord of how he could pick and choose. Normally, we would roto those pieces. We'd go make little shapes and make cookie cutters for those pieces of the robot suit. Then we would paint a background behind it without the green suit and then put them together and call it a day. But they ended up wanting to augment some of the pieces of the robot. So they wanted to use some pieces that were CG, so maybe the helmet or maybe the chest plate, but they wanted to keep some pieces that were Phoebe's. So we ended up having to do roto and paint. Oh, I'm sorry. What I said, let me back up.
Yep.
What we would normally do is paint out that robot, give the compositor a clean background, and then we would replace those pieces of suit with CG character. But because they liked Phoebe's performance so much, we had to roto them, paint her out, and we had a CG robot. So they could go, in this shot, we want CG helmet or CG chest plate, but the arms are going to be Phoebe's. Or we want the knees to be Phoebe's, and we want the hands to be Phoebe's, and then we'll do the rest of it in CG. Normally, it's replace it with CG.
Amazing.
If there's an actor in a suit like that, they typically just do full replacement. And in this one, they didn't. So it was double the work for
Well,
us, but it was so
that's why I was
fun.
curious. That in that part, we looked at the other example where you basically had to paint the whole guy out and used his motion, and now you've
Exactly.
got somebody in a partial green suit. And I mean, did you shoot a play? What's the advantage of having the green suit? Why couldn't you have just taken her motion just like they did on the other one and used that as the performance or motion performance? You know what I mean?
So what they did here, they put her in the green suit, thinking we were going to do what we did with Alan Tudyk, but then they started to really, really warm up to her performance, and they had her wearing the pieces of L3 because they didn't want it to be a fully human movement. So, in other words, L3 has leg joints, where we might have a hip joint. They wanted it to. They wanted her to have a little bit of a limited motion, like do something close to human, but they didn't want her movement to be so fluid that it was harder on the animators to make it look less human, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Yes, it does.
So they gave her L3, and they wanted her to have that helmet on so that when she turned her head, it had some of the weight of that helmet just to kind of
Hmm.
help things along.
Yeah.
But then they fell in love with her performance so much, they were like, okay, we love what you've done in creating the CG L3. We're going to get lighting that we couldn't get on set, and it was going to help compositors. Certain things reflected onto her pieces, or didn't reflect onto the pieces she was wearing. They didn't have the same texture.
Mhm.
So it became kind of a weird marriage between practical and CG that we don't normally do, but it worked out
And she was
great.
doing all the lines and everything live, right? I mean, she was
Right.
doing that. I'm sure they were dubbed
And she
back
was
in
ad
later.
libbing in some scenes too. So some of the lines were her ad lib lines.
Oh,
So because
interesting.
it's a humorous character. It's not just stand up comedy, but so she inserted some of her lines, and then that actually helped when she had to play off the other actors.
That's
So it was really kind of neat because K2 in Rogue One is a humorous robot, and they
Mhm.
let Alan Tudyk kind of have fun with it. But yeah, it was two very contrasting approaches to how to do it.
So speaking of humor, this other clip you sent me, which I really enjoyed, was it must be a Jurassic Park clip if I'm correct. It's the guys with the kids riding on
Yes,
the thing.
that's from
So
Jurassic World, actually.
oh, Jurassic World. Okay.
Yeah, more recent one. But that one is really fun to show because there was so much to do in there. But the guys, this was so great. When we saw this footage, we all cracked up at work
Oh
too.
yeah.
So they all the kids and the saddles are used in the final shot of the movie, but they had them riding around on the motion capture guys so that in the end you can see that there's like a petting zoo with dinosaurs and the
Mhm.
kids are riding on them, but they got really great motion from the kids sitting in these saddles. They had the guys walk on arms and knees and move slowly to kind of give that lumbering gait that a young dinosaur would have, we guess. But we had to roto the saddles and roto the kids off of the performance of the motion capture guys. But then the fun thing that we would do, some people don't think it's fun, we also had to paint them out because when you put in the dinosaur, they don't have the same shape as a person crawling around on their hands and knees. Once you're on your knees, there's that whole like calf and foot sticking out.
Yep.
So we had to go through and we just removed every piece of the guy, and then we were able to put in, clean sand, clean park rangers, and then kids on top of actual animated dinosaurs. So that one shows a lot of like the interaction with a real background plate that we had to do.
And those dinosaurs that they're riding on, which I am just always blown away when I look at that, and you're looking at an enormously large screen, and I'm looking at the detail and the in the foot. I've got a still up right
Yeah,
just of the foot when he slams
the
his
foot that
foot down.
stomps down.
Yeah, and I look at that and I am just totally blown away by the photorealism of that that shot and how good that looks and all the detail as far as when he slams his foot down and the shadows and the particles of dirt flying around, and that
Right.
stuff just amazes me, and I just think that's such a great shot. And when I saw that, I said, oh, we got to use that because it's just such a
Oh, and ILM focuses on the detail. That's what ILM does really well. Like they consider themselves creative partners. Not We're not just the visual effects house who will just create an explosion and give you what you ask for. We're going to work with you as a director, and we're going to make suggestions. And that shot in particular, everything you pointed out and more, the skin texture, there were a lot of conversations. I was in dailies on those days where they would talk about the texture of the what we would call like the toenails,
Hmm.
like where that meets the skin and how much it bubbles and what's kind of yellowish, what's kind of greenish, and to give dinosaurs the look that they've been walking through a jungle or through a petting zoo. They have to have, dirt on them from previous motion. So yeah, it's amazing. And I can think back to when I wasn't even a supervisor, but I would just go attend certain daily sessions just to pick up what the other artists in the room were talking about. You can learn so much just sitting in the room and hearing them discuss a shot, because you might look at it and go, yeah, this thing over here doesn't look right. That doesn't fit the scene. But then suddenly they're having a conversation about 10 other things maybe you didn't even notice. And that was just when I started out. And it was always my challenge to try to see if I could pick what looked right, what looked wrong. And now my challenge is, when something looks amazing, is there anything I would do differently, that I'll ask myself?
And it is, it is one of those things, I think, and I'm sure you know this, and I know it from just from being a viewer of it. People inherently are used to seeing things, whether you're picking it out or not. It's kind of almost an instinct when you see something, when it's not real and what it is. It's just from
Right.
seeing movement and seeing texture and seeing things. You can usually pick out something when it's a graphic,
And that's the hardest thing
yeah,
for people to achieve, because we can put a robot in a scene that doesn't look like anything else on Earth. You have no point of reference. But when you're working on something where like people know what this looks like, this has
mhm,
to look right.
right, right.
If you're doing a CG dog, all of us know what dogs look like, or a CG human. That's still one of the biggest
I was just
challenges
gonna
in
say
visual
that's the
effects.
hard one, right?
It's like you can get it to look close,
Yeah,
but the minute it doesn't look right, you've lost
yeah.
your audience, or
That's
the
gonna be.
roll of
I
the
think
eyes.
that's gonna be a
You'll get
tough challenge for you guys, Beth, because I've seen, and this is not a criticism of any films, because I know
sure.
you guys have done it a few times, had to because of losing actors and actresses and trying to put a recreated person into it, and there's just something. I truthfully think it's you just can't capture a soul. I think it's one of those things. There's something inherent in humans that when you look into their eyes, no matter how beautiful those eyes look or how well you did it, there's something missing behind the eyes that you just for some reason you can't capture it. It's just almost we're so used to looking at people and looking people in the eyes and feeling that between them, you're getting darn close, but that's a challenge, man. That is.
Everyone is getting really, really close, and that's the thing. Like, so much progress has been made in that field, but everyone is waiting for the one where you just go, I can't
Can't
tell.
tell.
And everyone agrees that like that's a hard thing to achieve, and we don't know if we'll ever get to the point where you just can't tell,
Right.
because you can get a still image where you could probably not tell, but it's
Mm-hmm.
it's the life of the motion, and then just that spirit behind the eyes, like you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
So
It sure feels that way to me. Hey,
gotten really, competitors have gotten close.
we're rolling over time here, and I don't care. But let's. I want to. There's a couple more clips I want to go through with you.
Sure.
One you sent me was, and I think it was from Pearl Harbor, maybe. Is that the one where the guys are running and the planes are coming and strafing?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, and I know you and I talked a little bit about that shot, and I'm going to run that now. And so we talked. Is this the one you were talking about where there's no blood or anything? This was all painted in, right? I mean,
Yes. This one's exciting because there isn't a single computer generated, meaning nothing's animated in those visual effects. That one came to me because we had a computer program that would do tracer fire from the plane,
mm-hmm,
but Michael Bay wanted tracers that he called hero tracers that came really close to camera and like went right past the camera. So I would get to paint those hero tracers. So they brought that to me to get these tracers that came really close to camera. And at one point they're like, well, can we have a couple that like look like they almost hit the camera where the lighting just fills the frame? So I did those.
mm-hmm.
And then like, well, if you can do that, they're like, maybe we could just do this all in paint. Like, can you paint the muzzle flashes on the planes that are as they're approaching? So I did the muzzle flashes. This I actually did in Photoshop. It was before we have our proprietary program here. So it was
Right.
on single frames, but I was able to play them in a different program. So I did the muzzle flashes. And then they're like, well, those tracers come so close to the guys. They're like, can you paint lighting effects on them so we can just keep this all in your hands? I'm like, okay. So I lit them with paint. And then the
Right.
last thing they said, they're like, a couple tracers come really close to that guy on the screen right side of frame. And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
can you paint a wound on his back and make it look like a tracer has hit him and maybe do a little splash of blood? So I was able to paint his clothing to look like it was torn, and I painted a wound into his back, and then I did a couple paint strokes of some blood flying up in a nice transparency. And if you were to, I don't know if you can and you don't have to, but if you were to step through it frame by frame,
I have been doing that. Yeah.
you would see that it's just paint strokes. It's just the suggestion. But when you hit play, it all works, and your eyes just go, "Oh, of course this
Well,
happened."
that's what I
And
was going to.
all of every effect in that
Yep, that's what I was going to say. Is the advantage of it is there's so much motion that there's a lot of blur, right? There's a lot of blur going on, but that
and some
disadvantage
of
is
that I was able to paint in too. It helps. There are times where we have leeway where we can actually change that. So yeah, that one's a really fun one. I've always enjoyed looking at that one and
yeah,
talking to people about that because every single thing in that shot that looks like a visual effects was done by hand. So that's a fun one.
yeah. That's why I said or the advantage from your standpoint is when you've got that blur, you've got a little bit more. Okay, I can kind of do this and blend the blur and make it look good. But the disadvantage of in that fast moving, how do you track all that stuff to stay with, especially with a
Right.
person that's got motion blur anyway?
And he's
And
turning.
yeah,
Yeah, he's
that
turning his
seems
blur.
amazing to
So
me.
in other shots, we do have some pretty advanced motion trackers.
Hmm.
So I could put a tracker on somebody, and sometimes I even have to adjust it by hand. In that particular shot, since I did it in Photoshop, I actually had to adjust that wound following his body by hand. And the
Oh
great
gosh,
forgiving thing is that it happens at the end of the shot. So it's really, I think it's under 10 frames
yeah,
where the wound is in there.
thank goodness.
If it were there the whole time, that would have been a bigger challenge. But that's plenty. That's a lot of what our department has to look for. Because a lot of times you'll do something, you can tell it's not tracking. It'll slide or it goes up when a person goes down, and you've got to go in and make an adjustment.
Yeah, well, that one looks great, and I did. You'll see if you watch this afterwards. I stepped through it and I froze it on certain areas where the blood splatters and where the tracer hits them and things like that. And and you step through it. It's flawless. I mean, it's really nice. You did some really great work. Okay, so the last one I'm going to talk about is, and I'm not sure what this film is. It's with the little
Sure.
girl running through the street.
Oh yeah, that's Pacific Rim,
Okay.
directed by Guillermo del Toro. That shot is so fun in this. So obviously, what ILM did was the destruction
Yes.
and the creature who's chasing after her. What our department had to do, we had to roto all of the cars along the side of the road and her, because as the buildings fell, all the destruction had to go down behind the cars and you could see all the debris through their windows. So we had to do all of that roto to make cookie cutters of everything. But then when we put her back on top of
Yeah.
the creature is beautiful and all the destruction is beautiful. Everything looked perfect. We're like, man, it doesn't look like they're in the same scene. And it turned out all of her hair that was bouncing, it's really almost impossible to roto the hair that's moving like that and get all the separations and the single strands.
Yeah.
So once we had a final composite with everything, her on top of the robot, my job was to go in and paint her hair. So in that final shot, that's hand painted hair, I put the original plate up on one side of my monitor and I painted next to it, and I went frame by frame and just tried to, like when you're sketching, you look at something and you sketch what you see.
Sure.
I tried to do that. So I tried to make her hair do what it did in the original plate. I literally grabbed color and painted those strands to bounce and flow, and then we put motion blur on my paint, and then we were able to final it.
Well, I'm stepping through that again, and that's amazing. I mean, that's
Yeah, when you step through, you can see it's not the same hair, but
oh yeah, but it looks great, Beth. I mean, that's just I'm blown away by that stuff because I know the amount of time it takes, and so just for other people that maybe don't, that scene, how much time did you spend on rotoring her hair, just doing her hair?
sure. Just the hair alone. Well, I had to do many takes because the first time, it didn't look quite right or whatever, and then we had to do different takes with different takes with different color hair, so it wasn't all one strand or one color. I would say in total, it probably took probably 2.5 days. which really isn't too terrible. But when you look
Are
at
these
it
8 hour
in terms
days, or are these
of
16?
camera,
Are these 8 hours or 16 hour days?
those were 9 hour days, so that was
Okay.
fine. But when you really count it, I mean, there are animators who, there are modelers who are building the models that have to be destroyed. Then there's someone who's building the model of the creature. Then someone else is making sure that all the creature textures don't split or tear into each other. Someone else is painting that texture to make it look right on the creature. Then someone else is animating him. Someone else is doing all the lighting and the explosion. It's just crazy. Then we're rotoing the cars and I'm painting her hair. It's just that many people, and we all did more than 2.5 days, because then we also had to do the roto. So in total, I mean, that a shot like that can actually take months start to finish.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because I know, a lot of these, a lot of the films, when they get shot and then they go out into post, or, a lot of times you're doing post at the same time they're still filming other parts of the movie. I
Right.
mean, post can take forever, and some of this stuff, what's your longest film? What's the longest film you've worked on where it's been in your hands for the longest amount of time?
For me, that would be Avatar.
Okay. Yeah.
And some of that is because, ILM has some of the greatest like R&D programmers and R&D artists. And we did not, at the time, no movie had been released that was a 3D feature film with visual effects. And we did not have the software in our hands yet to make that movie possible. So I was actually brought on really early. All the discipline supervisors had to discuss with R&D what a 3D package, 3D software would have to do in order to get our job done. So
Right.
I had to go talk to R&D about all the details of what we do and what we thought we would need, and then they actually made the software on the fly for us to get that done, at least for our department. And other departments, they were able to do something off the shelf, but with what we do, there wasn't anything out there.
Yeah.
So it was crazy because, James Cameron filmed that with two cameras. A lot of times a 3D film is done with one camera and someone will do the 3D conversion later, but he filmed it with two cameras. So I just described to you in detail the kind of paint we do. Well, I had to do that kind of paint for Avatar, but we needed it to be duplicated identically pixel to pixel on the other camera's footage so that we had a left and right eye.
Wow.
And there was no software at the time to do that. So that was,
Yeah.
and then we had to do that with our rotomats too. We make the cookie cutters of somebody that we have to place on top of
Sure.
something that's created in the computer. Well, we needed the software to go, oh, I have to take this rotomat and make it identical pixel pixel, but on this footage. So that was over 2 years that I was on that show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing to me, and I think it's one of those things where you work on something for 2 years, when it's over, you must have like a little bit of a work hangover from it, right? It's done, and you've been working on it for 2 years, and now all of a sudden it's done, and you go, I should be working on this, right?
Yeah,
I should
yeah.
be doing this. How can we be done with this? And how's your transition? How's your transition to a new project? Do you have is there a kind of is there, okay, we just start it right up, or do you feel kind of I don't know, maybe a little bit of a little sad or a little happy, or how do you feel when you make that transition?
I'm usually really excited that something's done because I can't wait to see it, with all the sound and everything else. Um, and I'm always excited to work on the next one. I'm one of those people, I'm like, okay, what else do I get to sink my teeth into? For sure. I love these. I can go from one to the next. The only time you feel a little like mentally like, okay, I need a break is, sometimes there's a big push at the end, or if changes were made late in the game and now you're like, okay, we still have to deliver on a certain time. We're contractually bound to do that. You can get into the point where you're like, okay, you're doing some things, not at the 11th hour, but sometimes there's just a bulk of work that comes at the end. And like I said, directors can make changes, or, maybe one sequence has changed. We've had directors where you get the entire film was almost done and they're like, we're going to reshoot this. We don't necessarily like what this actor's wearing in this. And so then you're like, okay, now I've got to kind of redo some of what I did, or I'm making this big push at the end. You can get tired and you can get physically worn out from doing the same thing all the time at a computer. But at the same time, I love it so much that it's not that big of a deal. Like, or maybe you take a week off after a show. Some people take a month off and just kind of
Sure.
go for a month and clear their heads.
So
But
that kind of leads me into like the last couple of questions here. We're almost at an hour, so you and I have we've doubled my usual my
it
usual
feels
like
like we just said hello.
I know, right? All right, let's start again. So
Okay.
now, so here's my last couple questions. What do you love the most about your job? What is the one thing that brings you into work constantly, and what do you love about it? What is the I know and I get a feeling for it. And I know what it is, but what specifically? What do you love when you sit down at your desk, or is it working with the people? Where do you go, and what's the love part?
Yeah, it actually is two answers because it's the people at the Lucas companies are just absolutely incredible. We My department alone, we have all worked together for over 20 years.
Mm,
And we can work on a show together, we can work on a project together or work on a shot together and we collaborate. And that's one thing that I just love at our company. We so many people have been there for so long and we share information. It's not like the competitive field where I learned how to do something and I better make sure nobody else knows it because I want to be the one they call.
right.
We don't have that. And it's part of it is, we're not in LA. We don't have the LA, like you've just got to stay one step ahead of the person next to you and get that next job in front of them. Like we like to work together and ILM really does feel familial that way. And I could not appreciate that more. And then the second thing is, I've talked about the kind of paint that I do. I absolutely love that. When I was in Milwaukee, I remember the first time I ever painted something out of an actual photograph for GE Medical Systems Television. I was working with Patty Zernicke, and I had to paint something out of like the model of a brain, and it was labeled with numbers. And as I was removing those numbers and reconstructing the brain, I remember saying out loud, if I could find a job where I do this kind of paint, this kind of reconstruction all day long, I'll be the happiest person on earth. And that's exactly what my job is right now.
Yeah.
And I've been asked if I want to move into other disciplines within visual effects. And I don't want to do something else. There's compositing, there's animating. I don't want to do those other tasks. I absolutely love the reconstruction we talked about, making something look like it's in 3D, but I'm painting it in 2D. That is quite the challenge. And I still get excited when I'm asked to do something. I've had to paint actors' mouths closed. I've had to reconstruct their clothing. And the harder the paint shot where you have to make something up by hand and make it believable, that just gets me energized.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I still enjoy it. I love it. I feel so grateful.
The very small amount of any 3D work I've done, and doing logos and whatever, there is a weird feeling that comes out over me when you create kind of a tangible object out of nothing. Really, I mean, it's and like you said, it's a 2D thing we're working with here, right? And I always remember making like a steel logo, or putting a new texture on something and turning it and doing the lighting and looking at it and going, wow, that looks so real, and you just get kind of excited about it. It's like, how cool does that look? That looks like you could go and pick that object up and walk away with it. So I got a small feeling of that, and that excitement. But at your level, I can't imagine. It's got to be.
It's so fun because when somebody is asking our department to do some kind of removal or reconstruction, it's usually because they have no idea how to get it done. We'll have directors go, you know what, like, I can't get everyone back on set. I can't reshoot these scenes, but that actor, I need him to not speak.
Right.
So to have everyone in the room turn and look and go, well, can we paint his mouth shut? They're thinking, oh God, please don't ask our department to animate that. Oh, we'll have to model somebody's face and make it still. To do something that feels like it shouldn't be possible and do that by hand is just so rewarding.
All right, so I won't ask you to incriminate yourself or incriminate your company, but I will ask you, what is the thing you don't like about your job? Like when you walk in, is there something you wish you didn't have to do, or something that you kind of, when somebody says, well, can you, and you kind of dread it and go, all right, I'll do it. It's I know all the stuff on the end of the rainbow is there later, but right now I don't want to do this.
It's a good question, and this is not an incriminating answer, and I think anyone who does what I do would probably say the same thing. So you've heard me talk about roto and making the mats of something that's moving. That can be rewarding and fun in its own way. But when you have to do really, really painstaking, awful, convoluted roto, that is probably the thing that makes somebody in my job makes their eyes crossed. And what that can be is recently on the movie Six Underground, it's one that went right to Netflix.
Okay.
There's a lot of buildings where a lot of the visual effects we had to do, backgrounds behind buildings or things were happening on tall skyscrapers. And there were a lot of buildings that had to be rotoed, and a big shape of a building, not a problem. But when it's one of those buildings that's in telecommunications and it has railings and scaffolding and
Antennas and yeah.
satellite dishes and they all have wires and things, I've had to do that kind of roto where it's like, 100 frames and the camera is coming around a building with all these satellite dishes and scaffolding and making that work so that you have everything stay where it needs to be.
So tedious, right?
So that kind of thing can be almost mind-numbing, but
yeah.
But we do it. That's one of the trade-offs.
Everybody's got something.
I know how to do it, so that's good.
So last question, Beth. Last question.
Yeah.
Is there something right now that you haven't done yet that you would love to do, that you would love to try to do, or love to try to accomplish, that you wish somebody come in and challenge you with something, I would love to try to do this? Is there anything in your mind that sticks out of something? I mean, you've probably done almost everything.
Yeah. One of the things I want to do, the newer technology you and I have talked about, the virtual sets.
Mm-hmm.
It's not clearly defined yet where my discipline falls into that kind of production, but I am super excited. And ILM is definitely in that realm right now, working on shows like Mandalorian. I definitely want to be one of the people who can help figure out, are we going to go do any kind of plate reconstructions while that kind of thing is being filmed? Right now, the understanding is, you don't have to really reconstruct something because we're going to make this virtual scene and it's going to plop right into place and look right from the beginning. But at some point, I'm going to see people, making exceptions. Well, okay, this virtual scene is going to look this way, but we can change it later. And maybe I'm going to do 3 different versions of a virtual set.
And maybe, Beth, as we talk about this, we just need to describe a little bit of what it is. You and I know, but it was used in The Mandalorian, and it is a large. Are they LEDs? What are they?
Well,
maybe you describe it because you know more than me.
Yeah, what I would describe it as is like the dome on a ride. One of the rides at like Disneyland or Disney World where it feels like it's all around you and you're in a structure and just kind of moving. Well, we've got these sets where you could almost make it look like somebody's filmed anywhere. We're doing the visual effect right there in camera, taking a scene that was filmed somewhere, some actors that were filmed somewhere, merging them together. But what they call the volume, it's almost all around you, and the lighting is correct. And since I haven't been there, I haven't been on set, I don't want to go too far into describing how it's done because I could easily misspeak. But it's virtual reality production almost, and I definitely want to dive into it more. I need to do some more reading on it, but it's pretty impressive, and a lot of the scenes in the TV show The Mandalorian were done using that kind of set.
Yeah, and I think if people are interested in it, and I think it's fascinating, and if you're interested in this, if you go, you can go on YouTube and look up, behind the scenes of The Mandalorian and how they shot it, and you'll see exactly what we're talking about. I think the technology is amazing. And I just had a discussion, believe it or not, with, and I don't know if I'm able to even say anything about this, but it was a corporate guy who I've known for years, and they basically bought I think a 10 by 20 foot wall, just like we're talking about now, and they're using it exactly that way. They're putting backgrounds up and they're bringing things into the foreground, like live action things in the foreground, so that they don't have to recreate or take people out to their locations and do that. So it's on a much smaller scale, right? Not because I think with the virtual sets they're actually using
thing, it's just a smaller.
Yeah, you're right, smaller, but just using that same technology. And I think it's kind of the wave of the future, and it's going to be some
My
cool
first
stuff.
experience with it was on the movie Deepwater Horizon, where there was an oil rig out to sea where there were explosions, and they had actors on set pieces and to be at the top of like an oil rig, but the fires and explosions were actually on LED screens. So all that firelight and flicker was actually reflecting onto the actors. And so there's a lot of that in that movie where we didn't have to go in and like, okay, let's take this actor off of the green screen. Now let's give him orange flicker. Now let's get that. It was all there. Yeah. It was pretty incredible.
Stuff.
It still required, some
Oh
technique
yeah,
to get it to look right, but just to have those fundamentals there just from a screen was the first time I had seen it. And there was, oil slicks on the ground that reflected fire from the
crazy,
LEDs.
right?
And so right there, we didn't have to put reflective fire into oil slicks. Like it was just there.
Yeah,
It was
and
there on set.
having that live stuff back there is great too. But think about from your standpoint. Now you're going to be recreating. You're going to be creating sets, basically, become set designers because you're going to be
Right.
building these three-dimensional photorealistic sets of things that probably don't exist, right? That never existed, right?
Exactly.
And now instead of putting them in later on, you'll be putting them in so that they can shoot with it in the background. It's going to be
And doing it, yeah, and doing it real time. So it's like
yeah,
taking everything we do in post, but doing it real time right there on the volume or on that stage. It's
crazy.
it's mind blowing that the technology is there
All
now.
right, Beth D'Amato, we're at an hour and 5 minutes, the new record for us here. So let's see how long you hold on to that. I think you hold it for quite a while because I don't geek out on a lot of stuff, but this stuff is kind of my I'm interested in it, and I love talking to you. So
Yeah, it's so great to see you. It's so fun to talk to you.
I know,
And thanks for asking me. This
sure,
was
of
such a
course.
fun thing.
Cool. Well, I hope people enjoy it and get to see you. And again, I really appreciate you doing this and taking the time to do it. And we will definitely talk again. Okay.
That sounds great.
Love
I
you,
can't
Beth.
wait for it.
All right.
Talk to you
See ya.
soon.